Because what we have found around here in the Ohio General Assembly is that when they want something done, because all it requires is a vote of the Senate and the House. We don't have to go there to the Constitutional Modernization Commission. We're talking about a few words that's just common sense. We could come together, vote on this, and get this done. Usually when you go to the other commissions, it's more of another layer, another step, something that doesn't have a deadline. As you know today, we got a deadline. And we must have a deadline to get rid of slavery in the Ohio Constitution. And that's what we're calling for today. We think it's a common sense measure, and we hope that our colleagues around the General Assembly will move expeditiously to send a message that slavery is not tolerated in our great state in 2016 and beyond. Thank you, and we'll leave these for you and be available for questions.
So this resolution, this would put it on the ballot to change the Constitution, the resolution to change the Constitution?
Yes.
Not just stay like we think this should happen, but it's actually something that would go on the ballot?
Yes, because it is in the Constitution, it would have to go on the ballot. It requires the vote of the House and the Senate. It doesn't require us to run out. We've done that with the Voter Bill of Rights. We've been out getting over 100,000 signatures, and federal court comes in and says early voting and Golden Week is legal. And the NAACP is part of that. They shouldn't have to spend all this money to get lawyers to tell us what we've been trying to say is common sense approach. If the General Assembly had moved with the Voter Bill of Rights, we wouldn't have this issue. But we've been willing, we've gone and got over 100,000 votes. We do not feel like we should have to go and get votes of the citizens to get slavery out of our Constitution. It's something that we can do. We did it with redistricting, and we didn't go through the Constitution modernization. We went through the Senate and the House, got in the room, this is what we're gonna do. We voted it, it got on the ballot, it passed. I don't think anybody in Ohio would vote against something that would remove slavery from the Ohio Constitution. All we're doing now is waiting for the General Assembly to pull the trigger, and I think that's something we should be able to do very quickly.
So are there practical applications of this to society today? You guys mentioned prison, you mentioned human trafficking, or is this more than symbolic?
It's definitely more than symbolic, and I'll let my colleagues talk more about that but it's definitely more than symbolic. When you look at our prison system and how it's run, when you talk about the pipeline of prison, Representative Boyce talked about what's happening in the prisons. Representative Ramos, more people of brown and black going into the prison system. Human trafficking, a major issue. I know Representative Feder been working on that. So this is real. And so we can't allow that exception to be in our Constitution, and I'll allow someone else to try to.
Thank you for that question. I'll try not to get too much into the weeds and legal analysis about this. But the way that the case law has been interpreted for this particular section, for both the United States Constitution and the Ohio Constitution, it allows state-sponsored involuntary servitude of prisoners. So when I said that there are prisoners, I don't believe in Ohio, but in other states, who are working call centers for private companies, and that work, they're not paying minimum wage to those individuals because it is involuntary servitude. Not even in quotations, it is involuntary servitude. So those prison workers are not required the same type of protection. They don't have to get minimum wage, but they're working for private corporations who are making a profit off of this prison labor. So then we have a situation where there is incentive for more people to be in prison because these private corporations can subsidize their workforce with prison labor. That's a very practical application of how we're working through this right now. I do recognize that there are opportunities for people who are in prison to do work. It might be beneficial for them to do that work, but when it's being subsidized and when we're using that private capital to do it, you really start to question how reasonable that work is and how it's going to help them when they are returning citizens. And as I said before, as soon as those people exit the prison door, they're convicts, and now they can't get a job at that exact same place where they were doing the work for that company when they were in prison. If they get out, there's no job for them. And so now they are coming right back to prison. And so it is perpetuating a cycle where it is to the state's advantage to imprison as many people as you possibly can And that is what we have a problem with. In terms of human trafficking, I think it is just important for us to say that those people are working in involuntary servitude and in human slavery as well. And so making sure that we let everyone know that this is not allowed in this state. It is in our Constitution. It is ingrained in who we are as people. We're going to protect those folks just as much as we protect anyone else. It's an important step for the state of Ohio. So I'm very hopeful that we continue to push forward with this information and this language, and everyone is willing to support it and get it on the ballot.
I guess just to follow up on what Representative Sykes said, it's not unlike the history of America, that on the backs of slaves, many corporations made millions and millions of dollars. They're the institutions they are today because of slave labor, free labor. And so why should we continue the past? We do not want to go back to the past. So that's why we want these 6 words out of the Constitution.
So you made, the example you gave was call centers used to employing prisoners for less than minimum wage. Is that happening in Ohio, or is there anything similar happening in Ohio? And what would this mean for people in that situation?
I'm not exactly sure if that is happening in Ohio, and that information is very difficult to come by because it's not something that people like to put out in the open. It exposes companies and it lets them know what exactly they're doing and how much they're really not paying workers when they could be paying workers who are not in prison and helping them get a job that makes minimum wage. They can support their families. Don't end up in a situation where they are now going to be in prison because they don't have enough money or economic opportunity. The one thing that is similar that is happening in Ohio is prison farms. You may have heard about them in the news recently, where there are prisoners working on different farms to provide food for some charities, which we would like to think is a nice and a good goal maybe. But to take it in a full perspective, we have to actually realize what is happening and how these people are being treated and whether or not this is something that we want to continue to support in the state. And I don't think that we should need to continue to do that.
President Reece, can I say something?
Yes.
If I could just add in the big scheme of things too, yesterday there was a provision in the EBR that was inserted in the EBR out of the House Finance Committee that would eliminate the Corrections Institutional Inspection Committee. And the questions that you're asking, that's the whole design and idea of that inspection committee. And we simply just eliminated that bipartisan organization to provide those kinds of data. And so when we're talking about this constitutional issue, there are layers that are built for oversight and accountability. And here we are eliminating those aspects. Now, it was replaced with another component, but that component is partisan and it is structured in a different way where it could deter us from getting access to the kind of data on the questions you're asking for, which in a way de facto promotes what's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Somebody brought up the fact that if you can't pay a fine, you can also you can do time in exchange for the fine. Do you feel like with this provision out that would be unconstitutional?
I do think that it would lead to efforts to make that unconstitutional. Being poor is not a crime, should not be a crime, simply because someone can't pay school fines. If you don't have the money, you can't pay the fine. Finding a way to help that person with a job is a more humane way to deal with it. Once the person has a job, then you can pay your fine. But if you don't have it, you can't pay it. To put somebody in prison, I mean, it really goes back to our efforts to eliminate fathers going to prison when they can't pay their child support. We finally saw the light that if the father is in prison, or the mother who might owe child support is in prison, they're not going to be able to pay the child support. So it goes counter to what we want. We want support of children. We want support of families, but not by putting that family member in prison so that they can't even support themselves and their family.
So I'm aware of, like with certain misdemeanors or other crimes like that, that there's like either pay a fine or do the time. When you say school fines, I mean, you mean like library fines at school? This is something I'm not.
Or if they're not paying their assessments for food, like if they're they're paying for their lunches or library fines or whatever the fines a school might have that that parent can't pay for, then in some cases, they're going to jail.
This is a misdemeanor, that's what you're saying?
Yes, and whether it's a misdemeanor, it's still imprisoning people for being poor.